Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Catalyst Energies. My name is Dee. Thank you for joining me. I am so grateful that you're here. Welcome, Sagittarius, to your full moon forecast. We are going to look at the main astrological themes for the next 2 weeks of this lunar cycle for primarily the Sagittarius rising people, Sagittarius moon, Sagittarius sun. Any iteration of strong Sagittarius in your chart, you're likely going to be feeling this full moon pretty strongly. So it's definitely worth a listen, but the astrological focus will be on the Sag rising chart, and then the Sag moon, Sag sun energy will be strongly related to that. So before we get into the chart itself and Sag, we embark on this journey together because I am 100% with you. I have a sun in Sag, I have a stellium in Sag, so this is definitely hitting close to home for me as well. So we're going to go on a journey together through the astrological chart. We're going to look at the full moon in its entirety, and then the 2 weeks leading up to our next new moon, which is going to be right before the solstice. It's going to be on the 18th of June. It's going to be in the late degrees of Gemini. So the axis of Gemini Sag is not over yet for the Sag people. And it's just, and the Gemini people as well, even though the new moon was at the end of Taurus. So there's a little bit of this inconjunct thing going on here. We're not fully along the axis of bipolarity, I guess, if you want to, if that's even a word, or polarity in the lunations that are happening right now, right? So we have the new moon at the end of Taurus, but then we have the full moon itself in Sagittarius. It's going to be like that for the next couple of months. So the next new moon will be in the last degrees of Gemini, but the full moon will be in Cancer because we will have crossed the threshold of the solstice. Anyway, so we're looking at the 2 weeks leading up to that new moon, in which 2 days after, so we will have our June solstice. So I have up on the screen here an image of a rendering of something called the Great Attractor. Now, we talked a lot about this in the weekly astrology report that goes out to the monthly membership. And just to give you a Cliff Notes version here that you can go and look into yourself, the Great Attractor is a gravitational anomaly. It is thought to be the center of gravity for a very the supercluster of galaxies that we, as inhabitants of the Milky Way, are still part of as well. So we have the Milky Way over here, which is part of the Virgo cluster, and then this large cluster of galaxies is here, and the Great Attractor is the gravitational center, or thought to be. And it's such a original, unique name, the Great Attractor. But what makes it important to this full moon is that it's in the same zodiac degree that the full moon is going to be, this Great Attractor. So we talked a lot about that in the weekly report. And so it's always worth going into and looking into more. But the thing that I want to bring up in this particular forecast for the Sag people looking at the full moon and the last half of the lunar cycle is something that I discovered when I was looking at my astronomy software. So as we bring up this screenshot that I took, if I can find it, of the astronomy software for the time of the full moon, which is June 3rd. It's going to be very late here on the East Coast of the United States, almost midnight on the 4th, but pretty late. And look at the proximity that the full moon is in to the star Antares. So not only proximity longitudinally, which is what we are measuring in all of our aspects and angles in Western astrology, but they're also very close together in the horizontal or latitude. So this is substantial. This full moon being so close to the heart of the Scorpion is going to just amplify the intensity of this full moon for the Sag people that much more. So I want to take some time to go into the star of Antares, talk about the ancient astrology, talk about the Starseed origin just a little bit for Antares and what it represents, so that as we go on the journey through the actual chart over the next 2 weeks, you keep these general themes in mind as part of the intensity of the revelation of the full moon. And just like every full moon, it was revealing the aspects of relationship that are working and what is going to be disintegrating, basically. So let me see if I can find it reveals either a culmination of relationship or the impossibility to go on with the relationship. And of course, when we talk about the sign that is represented by the lunar cycle itself, it's always about relationship, because it's always that axis of first house and seventh house for the rising sign. So if you have a sun in Sag, but your rising sign is different, moon in Sag, but your rising sign is not Sag, there will be some differences here. But the idea is that in these moments of revelation, what can continue through a positive culmination is revealed just as much as what needs to be let go and will disintegrate regardless of how we objectively and consciously approach it. So Antares is a powerful star. It's very easily recognizable. It has a lot of violent and death by battle energy associated with it, but we're going to unpack it a little bit in terms of the individual and subjective growth and evolution, which for Sagittarius rising in particular, but even for sun and moon, this full moon is right to the essence of identity and the projection of the identity. And Mars is usually the agent of that projection in first house. And so there'll be some interesting connections to the moon as it's coming up onto the full moon in relation to Mars and Leo, which has just been... There's just so much pride, and there's just so much, of that identity projection through creativity, through passion, through a sense of action and warriorship in Leo. And it is proud. It's the heart of the lion in Leo. And I think that's really powerful and important, but it can just as easily slip into such childishness and very ego-centered kind of conceit and acting on it specifically, that understanding how Antares is the anti-Mars, but just as powerful and hot and fiery, I think is going to give some little bit of insight on how to work with it as this full moon is culminating, okay, and where it's at in the chart. So those are the things I wanted to share with you as the great attractor and definitely Antares. And we're going to get into all of the juice, as it were, of Antares and how to work with it with this full moon. So the other things I want to share just real briefly here, in case you don't already know, most people are regular listeners, and I really appreciate that so very much. And if you value this content, you know what to do. You hit the like button, you subscribe, you share, you comment. It all influences the algorithm. But I want to share with you, of course, is if you're a Sag, Sun, Moon, or Rising, you have access to the sale rate for the lunar transit forecast, including the 30-minute check-in drive-by, as it were, that is not available to the public unless you are a monthly member. Then you get this sale rate no matter what your sign is. But for the Sag people, if you are wanting to get a sense of the rest of this lunar cycle, maybe get some insight onto the new moon. Ooh, that was loud. It's motorcycle season here, and that's available to you as well to book through my website. I'm also offering the 25% off still on all of my Starseed readings. It's already discounted in my store. You just have to go to the link that talks about the Starseed readings or the package in the description box. It'll take you right to the bookings site if you're interested in any of the Starseed readings, especially as we're going to talk about Antares and how that relates to, Starseed origins. And there are other Starseed origin activations that are happening through the course of this next 2 weeks. One of them that's the most prominent, I feel like, is that Mercury, as it's finishing its transit of Taurus and going into Gemini, is going to cross over the Pleiades, just like the Sun did not that long ago, and it's going to cross over Algol. And Pluto is coming back into Capricorn during this time. So there's all kinds of starseed connections there that we can talk about. So if you want to know for yourself so that you can relate that information to these general reads, well, it's all on a discount right now. And then, of course, since we're so close to the solstice, I have those seasonal forecasts available. Let me find it here. Solstice. There it is. Right. So if you're interested in getting a personal forecast for the upcoming season, which is solstice to equinox, June 21st to September 22nd, 60 and 90-minute readings. Again, it's linked in the description box directly, or you can just go to the website link in general and root around there and see what comes up for you. Okay, so I think it's important that we continue talking about Antares and we continue to talk about Uriel, because Antares is the royal fixed star related to Archangel Uriel. So I wanted to bring this image up just to inspire us, just to kind of get the juices flowing around some of these themes, because the full moon degree is 13 to 14 degrees. Now, 14 degrees is, and the number 14 is the number of alchemy and temperance. It is the Sagittarius. It is the Sagittarius card. It is art, right? Where you're bringing two opposing aspects together, and the friction creates the fire that actually turns something into gold, right? The alchemist's gold. That's the idea. So this is from a deck that I use every week in the Starseed Ministry. It's called the Akashic Tarot. And number 21 is pretty much, it's just about the end of the major arcana of this particular deck, which isn't numbered the same as your standard tarot. It's an 8-based system as opposed to a 10-based system. So Uriel and the Sphinx. Archangel Uriel is the archangel associated with, well, the wisdom of God, the fire of God. Uriel was not really, I don't think, was hardly mentioned at all in kind of the canon in terms of the scripture, the Torah and the New Testament, that entire system. But Uriel is mentioned specifically in the Apocrypha and the Book of Enoch, because Uriel is the one that came to Noah and said, hey, this is what's going on and this is what you need to do. So the fire of God, it has this purifying type of transmutational effect that is related to Sagittarius. Now, the degree that the full moon is, 13 to 14 degrees, the Sabian symbol language here is the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx. There is a connection to universal truth buried underneath or embedded, specifically the Great Pyramid, embedded in the mathematics of building these structures. So Edgar Cayce's works talks about how the Akashic records are found under the Sphinx, and the proportions, the mathematics that are embedded in the Great Pyramid have sacred knowledge just in and of themselves. And Uriel, connected to this card, I think is really interesting, considering the juxtaposition of Antares and then the Great Attractor, which is 14 degrees Sagittarius, the Great Pyramid, and the Sphinx. So Antares is about 10, just came into the 10 to 11 degree zodiac zone very recently in terms of where Antares is. So they're not the same place, and they're certainly not the same thing either. Antares is a star in our galaxy. The Great Attractor is somewhere way out in intergalactic space, pulling all of these clusters of galaxies together, right? We're a galaxy, and then we're part of a cluster of galaxies, and then there's a big cluster of those clusters, and the Great Attractor is at the center of that. So there's something profound here. And for the Sag person, whether you like it or not, you're going to get the profound sense of who you are and want to emotionally project that out in a lot of ways. And it's going to come through your direct interpersonal relationships. So I just wanted to bring this up so that we can start weaving these threads, which is such a Sagittarian thing. It's all about the big picture. But for the Sag person, the relationship, you have to approach it as an empiricist, right? As a Sag person, speaking from personal experience, it's always about the big picture. It's always about the horizon, always looking up, right? And always with the blessing and the larger than life. The details are the opposition to Sagittarius. And Mercury is about to come into Gemini. So there's going to be definitely this empirical, logical capacity that is about to come online for the Sag person in their relationships. But what we're going to look at in particular as we go through this too, especially with Uriel, and the need for that wisdom, the need for that purifying fire, right? Because Aries is the electrical pulse, right? The spark of life. if you will. Leo is the combustion of that solar energy, right? The heart being in its fullness and resonating, putting out a field, right? That's what Leo, it is the heart, and it's the heart pumping through the whole system, or it is the center of our solar system. While Sagittarius is the coal fire. It is the fire that is burnt down and is now actually hot enough to change the chemical structure, to transmute, to initiate real alchemy. And we may need to, well, I would say, especially in relation to, and look, there's a full moon in this picture as well, that there is a need for this fire in a lot of ways to give us the motivation and the impetus and the initiative to dig very deep past the rocks of our own history, of the substance of who we've been in order to get at this. Now, lucky for the Sag people, this full moon is just going to kind of reveal it in terms of the identity. It's like, oh, that's where I come from. But there will be this desire to really project that back out. And of course, with the full moon, you kind of can't help it, right? It is just a full illumination of the sun's light. And so how you do that, I think, is going to have a lot to do with your own chart and what's going on there. So let's talk about Antares and just kind of show you what's going on there. And then let's see here. We're going to bring up the window. No, not that. There we go. Now, Antares. Now, you can go and look this up for yourself. I'm going to show you exactly what to look up. So there is a, Wikipedia, Bohemian fixed star. It's a selection of 15 stars considered especially useful for magical applications in medieval astrology. So magical is a very loose term here in terms of what we consider magical, but there are a number of stars, and for those of you who are familiar with your starseed origins, you can see quite a few of them are in this list of Bohemian fixed stars, and they have a designation in terms of zodiac, they have a designation in terms of ruling planets, they have a designation of a mineral or a crystal, an herb or a plant, and then there's an actual symbol. So they're all here, and you can look them up, but what we're going to look at in particular, if I can find it, is Antares, is one of these stars, and it's the heart of the Scorpion. So like I said, it's just moved into that 10 to 11 degree of Sagittarius, but the two aspects that I really want to point out are, number one, the crystal or the mineral associated with Antares is sardonyx, which is a type of onyx, which is very protective and it's protective and it's strengthening. That's what onyx is, and it's a sardonyx comes in a red color, and so very similar to what Antares looks like. The light that is being projected from Antares is red and orange. So, and then the symbol for Antares, which I think is really interesting, and I want to know what anybody else has to think about this. This is the symbol for Antares, and the first thing I thought of, I was like, wow, that looks like the Ark of the Covenant, doesn't it? And so the idea that maybe the Ark doesn't have the tablets, but it has some sort, it is housing something that is akin to the wisdom or the purifying fire of God, just like Archangel Uriel represents. I just thought that was really interesting. So Antares is one of those fixed stars that is a Bohemian fixed star. It was recognized that the energy and the frequency of the light coming from that star had a particular effect and offered things like the same type of frequency as sardonyx, the same type of frequency as birthwort, right? This symbol is something that holds its own frequency, just like we learned in the Catalyst classroom with cymatics, right? It's holding a frequency and it takes a shape based on that frequency or that vibration. And all of these symbols, I think, really represent that on our own level. So there's Antares, Bohemian fixed star. You can look that up, of course, on your own. Now, what I'd like to also share here is just what the actual constellation looks like. Antares is up here, the heart of the Scorpion. And you can go to astrologyking.com and get all kinds of information about fixed stars and what they represent in terms of ancient astrology. So Alpha Scorpii is the fixed star Antares. It's fiery red and emerald green in the heart of the Scorpion. And remember how close the full moon is going to be to Antares. Now, the thing about these ancient astrology, like Ptolemy and more of the Arabic and Chinese, the Eastern astrology, and Greek as well, when we're talking about Ptolemy, there's always this really dramatic especially this star, malevolence, destructiveness, evil and danger of fatality. Makes people rash and ravenous and headstrong. Well, I mean, we're talking about a scorpion here. And the heart of the scorpion is the organ that's pumping the blood, and the blood carries the chemical messages from the glands in the endocrine system, and usually that is what triggers us to fight or flight or attack. Yes, it has to do with our nervous system, but at the same time, the chemical messages from our glands, our hormones, function in humans and mammals and all the way down to insects, right? Pheromones is how just about everything communicates or makes decisions, and that is an endocrine thing. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is it is the heart of the scorpion that's really responsible for getting that process going of attacking with the stinger. So it can make you destructive and obstinate and headstrong because it's all about going on the attack, right? But the other side of that is that there's great pride and commanding views, military honors, especially if Antares is culminating or is your rising sign. And I know that there are people that are part of our smaller Starseed group who have this on their ascendant. There's preferment and honor, military honor here. So it is malefic star in nature, but there's a lot of power that can be taken from this if it's really well aspected. So, again, like I said, high ambition, pride, love of power, grandeur of view, right? If military honors, but you have to be aware of this in this process. And so Antares makes people tough and belligerent and pugnacious, right? Sometimes there are scenarios where that is necessary to protect yourself and for self-preservation. This is also an important star for military personnel and is said to convey mental alertness, strategic ability, and courage, right? We're talking about Scorpio here and Sagittarius, which is the fire part. But there is a lot of violent character that comes along with Antares. And so Antares was on the ascendant of Gandhi, and he died by assassination, right? And I'm not trying to scare anybody here. And certainly, if we also just remind ourselves for a moment here that the U.S. natal chart also has its ascendant on Antares, right? Between Antares and the Great Attractor, actually. So keep that in mind that we're looking at micro and macro, at least at the national level here in the U.S., because that's the ascendant of the U.S. as well. So it's just important to be aware of these things, but at the same time, it's considered the rival of Mars because it has this hot, red, fiery nature, but Mars also rules Scorpio. So there's more than just the projection of the personal identity when you get to Mars and Scorpio. It's a hunger or a drive to get something deeper. So interesting. And so Archangel Uriel being part of what Antares represents, the city of Ur is where Abraham was born, and it was the first city to be built after the great disaster, and was given the name of Earth itself, which is Ur's. That's interesting. I didn't know that. The city stood close to the site of later Babylon itself. So Uriel, the archangel, was not mentioned, especially in the canon, sacred text, was only really in the Apocrypha, but was the one who held the secret knowledge of the great disaster and only revealed it to those judged able to accept it and still believe in the divine goodness and that all in all that befalls us. So, which is very scorpionic, you know what I mean? You know, being able to look into the abyss and not like fall into it yourself takes a special fortitude and constitution. So, the other thing about this star is that it's opposite Aldebaran, which is the royal fixed star connected to Archangel Michael. So you can bet, especially with where the sun is, as this is coming into, especially where the sun is, as this is coming into culmination with the full moon. That is 10 to 11 degrees Gemini, right? So there is always some sort of battle. Right? And for the Sag person, unfortunately, I feel like that battle is going to be within the self in terms of the projection, the emotional projection of the identity and the identification with and sustainment with the relationship that is inevitably responding to the projection of that identity. Okay. And so if it's really about making that sting, right? If the heart is feeling, you know, if there's a threat in any way, the heart's going to initiate the stinger to come out. And there's that rashness and being pugnacious. That's a great word. And obstinate. But the other side of that is that it's such a reflex, right? That you don't have to necessarily think about it either, depending on how fine-tuned you are to the world around you. So let's start getting specifically now into the astrology, because then we can see how to actually make sense of all this and what to anticipate as we go through the next 2 weeks, because there's some substantial things happening. So, now that we got all of our pretext developed here about all of this, we can start diving into the actual chart itself. So I have this cast for the full moon itself with the sun in Gemini in the 7th house for the Sag rising person, about telepathy, right? I've been hearing about, a lot about this just in the last couple days. And the thing is that telepathy means you have to kind of transcend all of the other noise, kind of, filter out the background noise and be in resonance with that other, whatever other is. And in that process of being in resonance in a way that transcends all the other signals that are trying to come in and be forced into that situation, then there is the culmination moment. It's coming regardless. What people struggle with full moons, as far as I can tell, is the realization that what can't continue will disintegrate over the course of the next 2 weeks. And so, Sag, like, what is it about you? Where is, in terms of your identity, your subjective experience, your projection of that person out into the world, and emotionally projecting yourself out into the world, being very sensitive to this process? What is it that is going to, these are questions you have to ask yourself, really. What is it that's culminating and what is disintegrating? Either or both, right? And about you and the person you're projecting out into the world, which has a lot to do with, the nature of the relationships you're identified with, and specifically your ability to work with all the data provided in this area. I feel like it's going to be a lot easier to learn in that type of empirical, logical way when Mercury comes into Gemini, into the 7th house. So we'll get there. We'll definitely get there. So let's see, what else is happening leading up to this day? Well, if we go back in time here, when the moon comes into Sagittarius for the first time, in this month at least, it's going to sextile Pluto. Now, Pluto has been transiting for just a hot minute, the 3rd house for the Sag rising person, and is now retrograde. So it's going to go back into the house of actual physical resources and inherent value and wealth and your body and all that stuff. But what it had been dipping the toe into is the mind and the cognition and what's right in front of you, Sag, and what is the life experience that you are actually interacting with on a daily basis. So in the 3rd house, your commute back and forth to work, your conversations with your family members, your roommates, your coworkers, your neighbors, right? The consistent pattern of data and bits going back and forth. It is the electrical signal moving through your nervous system and functioning. So that's the 3rd house. So big long-term changes starting to be initiated in that area just a little bit, and then Pluto in its retrograde is going back into the area that for years now has been making that type of basically eliminating and creating the groundwork for metamorphosis in terms of your actual resources, your body, your energetic resources, your traditions, your genetics. All those things are part of the second house. And so now that it's come into the third house, the moon making that sextile as it comes into your sign, Sagittarius, is deeply buried emotions become exposed. And there is exposure already with the retrograde of Pluto. It's already exposed what it is destroyed to begin with in these areas, and now is going back over in the retrograde, and we are kind of surveying the landscape here, and there's a certain amount of willful ignorance right now, I feel, in terms of a retrograde Pluto, of not seeing what's already been destroyed. It's like an open wound, right? It's been cleaned out and dealt with, but you still have to it still has to heal, and it can definitely expose what has been embedded under the surface with this sextile, and this will evolve relationships. But it's and anything in a state of decay can be reborn in this area. But I would say just be mindful coming into this that you already kind of know in some ways what is, in terms of what's right in front of you, the functionality and even the structure of your nervous system and your mental processes. There's already been work done here by Pluto and some things that have been eliminated. It's just now, as the moon's coming into your sign of Sagittarius, you're like, okay, so this is working to expose, and how do I feel about it, right? Like, how does that feel to me, and how do I project that emotionally? You might have powerful intuition, and get to the cause of a bad behavior, right? And in terms of the way that your identity is projected or your subjective experience. So right away, as the moon comes into Sag, it immediately comes into that relationship with Pluto. Now, it's going to square Saturn leading up to this as well. So let's go back in time a little bit here and look at this, because this square to Saturn is also really important. This is the degree that Saturn is going to station retrograde at the very end of this lunar cycle. Like the day of the balsamic moon leading up to the full moon, Saturn stations. And it stations at this degree, 7 to 8 degrees of Pisces, which is opposite Draco. And we've talked a bunch about this already. So without going back into the whole diatribe about Draco, just know that, this Pisces degree that's opposite Alpha Draconis is like your conscience, right? That you have to, and with Saturn here, there's a lot of limitation, right? That you have to be impeccable, really, in terms of surrendering to the divine will and to the karma of the situation. Now, this is not easy, Sag, because Saturn is in Pisces in the fourth house. There's some really, there's some serious limitations, but at the same time, it's crystallizing and stabilizing this area in terms of home and family, your personal power, where it's coming from, your character, your self-esteem, right? I mean, Saturn's not here to pad your bottom and to necessarily make you feel good. It's there to hold the line and to be the crystallized matrix unfolding. The law, it is judge, it is very paternal in a lot of ways, and it is, like I said, it's unyielding. So, which is interesting in Pisces, because sometimes it could seem like it is yielding, but it's really not. It's just consistently in that space. So let me show here where this square is happening. So when you have a moon square Saturn, it becomes so much more challenging to connect emotionally. There's sadness and there's guilt. Maybe you're remembering past failures or grief or loss in terms of relationships and closeness. There may be low self-esteem. And again, with Saturn here, where you can't really get away from it in your fourth house, I mean, it may really drag that self-esteem down very deeply, or maybe a sense of bitterness there. Absolutely. Other people or situations can cause distance in relationships. Now, the moon in in your first house, especially in this square to Saturn, this degree of Sagittarius, as we are now getting closer to Antares, this is about like psychic gestation. This is about new elements being formed like within the magma under the earth. It is something that is absolutely happening, just like the coal fire, right? It doesn't actually look like anything's happening, but wow, that is the hottest of the hottest the fire gets when it's at that level, but it seems like nothing happens, and it's because it's happening within, within, basically. And so even though there is a square here to Saturn, and maybe that's Saturn in Pisces in the fourth house especially, it's just like you need to be here. You need to be responsible here, to the home, to the family, to and that can be really depressing too, especially if you feel kind of bitter about it, or you may feel a sense of I can't get myself out of this place. And I think it's extra confusing with Neptune, but we'll get there. This moon square Saturn is a reminder to lean into how that's uncomfortable, because something is bubbling below the surface of you, emotionally, Sagittarius. And, to just keep that perspective emotionally. See, a moon in Sag is where we really tap into our inner strength, okay? So there may be unhealthy or codependent relationships or aspects of relationships that can really end with a square like this, because it can't withstand the tension emotionally with the limitation of Saturn and restriction of Saturn. So you may feel restricted. I am getting a lot of that, because things are getting more difficult to, you really, especially with Saturn, you really have to know who and what is guiding you. You have to have unshakable surrender to the cosmic flow here, in a way that no matter what happens, even if you're feeling this depression or feeling the challenge to connect, and you can feel the weight of it, you know that deep inside, emotionally within yourself, there's something new in your identity that's definitely bubbling. So that's one way to make the most out of that particular square. Now, here comes the trine to Mars leading up to the full moon, right? Which is very much connecting to Antares. So, which is the anti-Mars. So the fact that there's a fire trine with these two, and by the way, Sag rising especially, Mars in Leo is in your ninth house. This is the Sag house. Now, Mars in the ninth is giving you so much of that personal initiative and projection of self into traveling, into higher education, into wisdom teaching, more exotic type of journeys, right? Ninth house could also be that like shamanic journey as well, these cosmic vistas, and really ultimately the ninth house is where we discover the purpose and meaning of the relationships in our lives, whether they be personal, professional, spiritual, whatever they are. The ninth house is like, oh, I see the big picture now. It is the tapestry of all the threads woven together. So when Mars is here in your ninth house as a Sag person, there is a lot of that energy acting, and giving you the initiative to spread out and broaden your horizons. So this trine with the moon in Sag, it's important that you emotionally, especially because we're talking about the moon, it's very easy to connect with other people when we're talking about our emotional landscape. It's important that you become alert to the interests and needs of others. So there's a lot of competency in pursuing your ideals, right, with this particular degree of Sagittarius, which is 8 to 9 degrees of Sagittarius. And there's an emphasis on remembering that we are each other's keeper. And I know that some people are like, I don't want to take care of anybody. But the reality is that we can't really do it without each other in any social context. So whether your relationship's personal, it's in a larger family structure, it's your job space, it is the industry you're part of, and just society in general, we really are here to take care of each other. So we have to develop and keep, a genuine self-conscience. And this is connected to Antares as a starseed origin. So first, let me talk about the trine to Mars, which is basically all that courage and initiative to take the lead and to use your sense of understanding and synthesis and big picture energy to, as long as you are keeping that genuine social conscience, this is amazing. You'll intuitively know what to do, how to get it, to be direct and assertive, and to really shape your personal creative expression and endeavors with this sense of social conscience. But you need that sense of social conscience and that side of Antares that is really about the purification and also the capacity to stare into the abyss and not make rash decisions with the incredible power of the Scorpio sting. So in terms of Antarian starseeds, the thing that I want to say about that is that they're not as prevalent as others. And these individuals as starseeds, the beings that are associated with Antares, based on my own observation and my own research at this point, because none of the starseed stuff, I say this all the time, there's nothing definitive. The only thing that's definitive is that is a star. It has a frequency or a spectrum of light. That spectrum of light goes through different aspects of our solar system, and there is a geometric pattern that has a mathematical component to it, okay? Just like everything else that's frequency based. So Antares is no different. But based on observation, based on the other things I've read, and based on knowing about Antares as a star in ancient astrology, you don't get a lot of Antarian beings that are necessarily incarnating into physical form, because when you do that, you have all the trappings of being in a physical material body with that. It's a lot easier to be rash and pugnacious when you are in survival mode of your physicality. So there's not a lot of Antarian starseeds. You come in specifically to guide people, and it's like the mother leading the child up the staircase. There's a maternal energy, just like Scorpio itself is a feminine water sign, but it's like a Kali energy, and it's also it also has that social conscience to it. But there's something, the Antarian starseeds that I've worked with and working within myself with that particular aspect is that it's very difficult not to be the Scorpio that stings coming into form, because there's that survival aspect that absolutely gets drawn out. So the Antarian starseeds, it's a difficult line to basically hold, essentially. And so just like Antares is such a powerful star that has all of this energy about violence and battle and death and really being rash in some ways, but then you have military honors that really requires a sense of discipline that can be very difficult. And I think the only thing that keeps that moral compass or ethical compass calibrated with Antares is that you either don't get involved, which is not really an option, or that social conscience is truly genuine. And I think that we can really make the most out of this moment here with Mars trine the moon, coming up to the full moon with that perspective. So knowing that you yourself, Sagittarius, are the mother leading the child up the stairs, and how to project that emotionally in a way that actually then can be projected into your larger, travels and study and education, right? The ninth house is the higher mind and understanding. So Mars is just going, right? It's not processing. It's not doing the alchemy. Mars is just like, I'm going. And that, I feel like as long as your social conscience is in the way, then your instinct will be true, right? And you will sting when you need to. And otherwise you will be there to assist those who truly and genuinely need to be assisted, right? And I think the Antarian starseeds, they take a big hit as beings coming into this form through that Stargate. And Antares is a Stargate that is my understanding that takes you out to the Andromeda Galaxy. So I think that's really interesting too. So And then we have our full moon by the end of the day on the 3rd, which I've already gone into great detail about. So let's start looking forward and get an idea of what to expect here. Now, Sag, this whole 6th house thing that's going on right now is a big deal for you. Number one, ever since Jupiter came into Taurus, is recently met with the North Node. It is, everybody struggles with their 6th house because that's the area where you have to just put, one foot in front of the other, one grueling step at a time in order to mature, in order to get your work done, right? In order to heal or be on the path of healing. It's not glamorous. It's not sexy. It is something that requires discipline. That is the 6th house, right? You have to do it every day, even when you don't want to, right? Whatever it is you put into practice. Now, this has been a big struggle, I think, for the Sag people to have all of this stack up of Mercury and now Jupiter and certainly Uranus in the 6th house, and the North Node has been there for, the last year and a half, basically. It's soon going to come out. We're going to talk a lot about the nodes changing on the solstice report that goes out for everyone. So, but in the meantime, it has all been about what are you doing? What does your work look like? What does your daily routine look like? What is it that you have put into practice that is actually drawing your resources using your root system, which Saturn is just like, yep, this is your root system. You're not going anywhere. It's so entrenched. It's like an oak tree in this area. And in fact, that's going to come up a lot in various ways throughout this report, this concept of the oak tree and how it stabilizes us in a lot of ways, but it is not easy to uproot something like that. And that is definitely what is being brought to awareness for the Sag people right now in terms of home and family. So, and how strong that root system is. But when that root system is really strong, it's not very easy to uproot it, which is Mars is just like, let's go, let's uproot it and just whatever. And Venus coming into Leo during this time as well. It's definitely also going to be like, I just, especially with the retrograde, I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but I just, considering that the 9th house is the Sag house, Venus coming into Leo and stationing retrograde at the very end and just spending so much time in this house, there's going to be a lot of experiences that are going to have to happen in this area in order for you to build personal meaning for those experiences, whatever they are: travel, higher education, wisdom, teachings, shamanic journeying, learning a new going into a trade and learning something new, whatever this higher mind is. There's going to be a lot of experiences, so be ready for that. So back to Taurus and the 6th house for Sag, it's not been easy. And now that your chart ruler and your planetary ruler is in the 6th house, you have all of the means to manage this now, right? Whereas before, especially when it's just been Uranus, and of course there was this whole transit of the Sun and Venus and Mars to this area, this has been a big theme, right? And it has a lot to do with resources and how you're using those resources in your service, in your works and labors. And now Jupiter is here to manage all of that for you and give you all of the understanding, all the managerial abilities. Jupiter is a great manager, right? As well as a great lawyer, right? They are the manager. They come in and, delegate, right? And be like, you do this and this and this, and because I hold the big picture. So in terms of these, what you're doing every day, what is your practice, right? How are you perfecting yourself as a vessel so that when you enter into relationship, which especially when Jupiter comes into Gemini, you are prepared. You yourself are the perfected vessel. So there's been a lot of struggle, I think, here for the Sag people. And no way around it, right? The North Node's just pulling you in that direction. That is the direction of the soul's evolution right now. So at least Jupiter's here now. And even with that conjunction with the North Node, the opposition to the moon, see the moon in conjunction with the South Node, while that opposition was happening, was probably not very, it probably didn't feel as good as it probably could have for Sag people with Jupiter as your ruler, right? Meeting, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, but it's like you still have to emotionally go into the space in your own karma, in the collective unconscious, to feel it out. And it probably didn't feel very good, and it probably was frustrating to be like, I get it, but what am I going to do to get there? Well, that's what the sixth house is about, what you're doing to get there. And Mercury and Uranus, when they come into their conjunction, I think that that's going to be a breakthrough. So in terms of what you're doing and what's important to you, where do you want to put that energy, right? Your conscious mind becomes directly activated by the universal mind, by the collective consciousness, and it's going to be very enlightening, I feel, in terms of, oh, this is what I can be doing, or this is what's important to me in this area of how I work, What do I do with my day? What do I do with my resources? So it's frustrating. Hold fast. We're getting there. Like there's breakthrough that is coming. So let's look at that actually. Let's look at when that's happening. So the moon's still in your sign, Sag. And before Mercury and Uranus come into that conjunction, the moon in your sign is going to quincunx both of them. So just be ready for it's already building by this point. You can see fourth into the fifth, and you can already, by the time we get after the full moon, it's already going to start like aggravating you and you're feeling weird and in terms of that. And once these two are exactly conjunct fourth into the fifth, you will be like, oh, okay. And your distraction is going to be off the charts. And, but it's really good to grasp the overall concept rather than to getting into the minutia of things. So your thinking is going to definitely be stimulated in terms of, okay, what am I going to do with my everyday life, right? What is important to me in terms of my service to myself and to humanity? How do I perfect myself through my service? Unexpected news can come up. Don't jump to conclusions, right? Because things are very erratic when Mercury is conjunct Uranus. And communication's erratic, thoughts are erratic, new people can enter your life, and this is the thing that really sticks out about this conjunction of Mercury and Uranus for you, is chance encounters provide valuable pieces of information. I think that there are things that haven't quite really locked into place yet, and part of that is this quincunx to both of these from the moon in your sign that is going to be so unnerving and so just disruptive in terms of your identity versus, what do I do with myself to perfect myself? Those things are going to be a precursor, and then they're going to come into this exact conjunction on Sunday the 4th. And I just feel like valuable piece of information. It's not nearly about acting on it right this second, but to be aware of that aha moment in terms of your service and your works and your labors and what you're doing with yourself every day. What is your routine, right? Like, what are your work habits? What is your energy being put towards, and how are you organizing yourself? So again, the good news is that Jupiter is here in this house. So you have, as a Sag person, all of this ability to manage this now. So the moon comes into Cap after this, and this is about the time that Venus comes into Leo and then is opposed to Pluto. Now, this is going to be also really intense. So let's take a look at that. Because of Venus opposite Pluto, people become really obsessed and compulsive about things when Venus comes into an opposition with Pluto. Plus, Venus will be in the first degrees of Leo, which is like that blood rushing to the head. Now, keep in mind, Mars in Leo is action-oriented, but Venus in Leo is like, everybody pay attention to me. Like, it's very diva-like, and in a good way, right? There's so much like attraction, and there's just so much of a shining, but there's also this really strong desire to be pampered and to be given attention to, and to have that sense of I'm the center of everything, and not acting on it, but receiving it. So remember, Pluto's retrograde, and there have been destructive elements that have already been revealed through Pluto now that it's retrograde. So Venus opposite Pluto. So when is this happening here? This is on Monday the 5th. So this is coming into next week. It adds intense pressure to your closest relationships, right? Because Venus is about beauty and harmony and what we love and who we love, who and what is valuable to us. And that's usually our closest relationships. You may feel suspicious and jealous and possessive, right? This is where people get compulsive attractions. They become obsessed with these things. It's very common with an aspect like this, Venus opposite Pluto. Not so much with the retrograde, I would say. It's common to fall in love with someone who is going to either mistreat or abuse you in a transit like this, okay? Increased power of attraction may go to your head. Exerting force over a weaker person to fulfill your own desires, either physically or energetically, is not within integrity at all. So it's tempting, but be aware of what you are saying or doing or how you are acting if you are trying to exert some sort of force to get something that you want, which is to just, fulfill a desire. Whoever feels victimized is probably going to be the one lashing out, even if they're not the victim. And you can usually tell if people are, running guilt trips or not. Be open and honest with your partner to address your power issues. I think that what's going to happen is that people are going to become aware of these power dynamics already having been in place and now having been exposed. And I think that's where the intense pressure is going to be. So for a Sag person, the third and the ninth house with Aquarius and Leo, this is about your mind and your higher mind, what's right in front of you and the broader cultural horizons, your knowledge and information and the big picture here. And as Venus comes into the ninth house and has this sense of meaning and value of the big picture, the tension here, I do feel like for you, Sag, is that the damage has already started to be done in terms of what's right in front of you, your mental sphere, your cognition, your discovery, your exploration, right? You are adapting to what's right in front of you in the third house. You are adapting to the environment, and something has profoundly changed because it's going through the stages of transformation in this area. And I think Venus is coming on board going, I am, just feeling that intensity and that compulsion and that attraction in terms of the big picture. How are you going to, what does this mean and how do you derive meaning from it? I think that that's going to bring people to a state of like, oh, I didn't even realize this was going on in this way and getting, but you also have this increased power of attraction in this area that could actually work in your favor as long as it's not getting out of control and you're not using it. This is about the openness and honesty of the Sag energy, which Sag people are really good at, almost to a fault. Sometimes it's a little too blunt of honesty, but maybe this type of transit, it will be really good for the communication and the understanding that the third and ninth house represent. So, and the moon will be in Capricorn, right? The moon is in Capricorn, and through the 6th and the 7th, it's going to move into Aquarius on the 7th into the 8th, and then there's going to be a T-square. Venus is going to T-square the nodes on the 8th. So let's look at that, because we're coming up on our third quarter square, which will be in Pisces here. Let's see. Venus T-square the nodes. Yes, so here we go. And of course, with all T-squares, right, you just want to look at the ghost point to get an idea of where the energy can be directed as opposed to where it seems to be the most concentrated, which is usually on the actual point, the point of the T-square. It's really not showing up, which is frustrating, right? Because there's Venus right there. It should be showing a square by now, but maybe not. It's really good to have the visual here when it's happening so that you can get a sense of visually what's happening. It kind of imprints in your mind more when that's the case. Well, it's not giving us the T-square energy, but here is Venus in 4 degrees Leo, and what's that ghost point? It's down here in Aquarius, and this also, the moon definitely crossed over this point in its own T-square, just on the opposite side. So really, if we went back to when this was the case, you'll see a pretty significant grand square. Actually, it probably won't come up directly, but that's okay. I wish it would. I wish it would. Oh, not 30 seconds. 3 hours. There we go. So it's still pretty wide, but you can see that the moon has this T-square to the nodes beforehand on the 7th. So we're working with this axis of Leo and Aquarius on both sides of things as well. And, with all grand squares, there's really no way out of it. You just have to go through it and feel the tension of all these angles that are basically boxing you in. But the moon in the 3rd house, like this, especially at 3 to 4 degrees of Aquarius, is really about the responsibility of demonstrating one's healing power. So I feel like that as much as Venus is looking for that, to recognition, look at everything that I've done. Isn't it valuable to everyone? I need the reinforcement in terms of attention or pampering or whatever in terms of the value and meaning of these relationships. You're kind of craving it with Venus in the 9th house and the moon in Aquarius, which allows a little bit of emotional detachment here to be like, right in front of you are opportunities to demonstrate what you have done in terms of, healing your own mind, healing your own thought patterns or those neural pathways, healing others that are right in front of you, either through, whatever spiritual healing work that you can do. And I think that you will find is going to be very productive in terms of then lending itself to feeling a sense of attention and acknowledgement and value to what you've already accomplished in terms of your own heart space or your own soul sovereignty. Right? It's hard, when you really are looking for the recognition and the value and meaning of what you are doing, and you have to kind of like self-source it basically. And it's not that you have to self-source it entirely. You can still interact with those that are right around you and demonstrate what you can do. And you may find that in itself is going to fulfill what you're looking for in terms of meaning and value in terms of the big picture. So now the moon is going to come into opposition with Mars, right? So it's obviously coming into opposition with Venus, but the moon coming into opposition with Mars is going to be a different story entirely, because this is where we come into how strong is that root system in terms of our home and family, our self-esteem, and our character. So the moon is in Aquarius, 11 degrees of Aquarius is receiving a new inspiration during a silent hour, during a silent space, and the moon in the 3rd house is intuitively picking up on these patterns here, is feeling into the immediate environment in a way that is intuitive and is subtle, right? Because the moon is about that internal landscape. And so there needs to be some measure of quieting of the mind in order to receive this inspiration. And the opposite of Mars, because Mars is like, hey, I'm up here swinging around in this tire swing up here and having a great old time. So when Mars and the moon are in opposition, this makes people moody or short-tempered. And the reality is that Mars acting out like a child is going to seem impulsive and childish. And the moon in Aquarius down here is going to be like, I need to find a place within my own mind, my own cognition, my own immediate environment where I can get some silence from these strong urges of desires that want to be fulfilled, that are childish and very playful, right? channel that energy into something productive and consider the needs of others. And remember, Sag, that Saturn is in your fourth house. So that oak tree that tire swing is attached to has been there for multiple generations and is what is stabilizing this sense of inner power and consolidation. So, it's okay. I feel like I don't think you're going to really be able, especially in your ninth house. Like, you want to swing around wildly. You want to play. You want to have that experience that's dynamic in terms of the big picture here. Again, traveling and moving around and broadening your experiences so you understand. But the opposition with the moon is emotionally and very personally pulling you into the world right in front of you and asking you to basically sit in meditation, right? Sit in silence, find a silent moments and find a way to productively channel the energy that is just like so dynamic and wanting to branch out very strongly into, the great unknown in a lot of ways. So, but it's all coming from within, as everything does. So the moon will continue its transit of Aquarius and then move into Pisces, and that's when Mercury is now coming into conjunction with the Pleiades. So we're going to have another round of this Pleiadian algol type of energy that we had at the new moon, which unfortunately was a window open, especially because it was a new moon. There was a big window that opened, and a lot of people took that exit, right? And it's usually very tragic, and something that's not always planned for. It's not necessarily after a battle with a long illness finally, and in some cases, yes, absolutely. And that's where the Pleiadian Starseed energy comes in to provide empathy and bereavement counseling and death doula types of services. But with Mercury coming into this place, it's going to be a lot less of the heart being involved like the sun is. It's going to be much more pragmatic. It's going to be much more, more on the masculine, more swift in a lot of ways. And coming into conjunction with Algol, I think that people lose their heads before they even realize they had one. You know what I mean? So, okay. So as the moon comes into Pisces, which is where we're going to get this third quarter moon action. Oops, not a whole week. We're going to go... So Mercury is going to come into conjunction with Algol. It's going to sextile Neptune. The moon is going to be in a conjunction actually with Saturn as well on, this looks like Friday, June 9th. And it adds a seriousness to your emotions. You have to deal with what's going on here in terms of your personal power, your private life, how you feel on the inside. And there may be drama at home when the moon and Saturn are in conjunction. You may feel rejected. You may feel depressed. You really need some self-discipline and emotional security when the moon and Saturn come together, because a lot of feelings of guilt about the past, especially for you with Sag rising, with Saturn in the fourth house. I mean, there's definitely some drama at home that is about the seriousness of your emotions. And especially if you really identify with this degree, 7 to 8 degrees Pisces, which is like answering the call. Exposing your emotional vulnerability in a situation like this to those you love and who you trust will enable nurturing and bonding, rather than kind of holding back and letting that kind of negative attitude take over, right? Or feeling detached or isolated or rejected from people. So you have this, and then you have the Mercury sextile Neptune while Mercury is conjunct Algol. So this usually can be a good transit for relaxation, communication, for creativity. Your words can become soothing and healing to others. And again, acute senses allow you to pick up on information through intuition. So you may receive spiritual information through dreams or spirit guides, and this has a lot to do, there may be some seriousness here and with the moon and Saturn in the fourth house, but now that Neptune's been here for a while for you, Neptune in this sextile to Mercury over in your sixth house, there is a broad, vast spiritual aspect to where you belong that's deeper, that is more transcendent than Saturn can provide, right? Saturn's that oak tree root system, but Neptune is everything, right? It is the living waters themselves. It is the undifferentiated source that broadens and is like a solvent of what's been there in the past. And this is something that is way, I don't want to say way deeper because it's not than Saturn, but this particular sextile, I think, is going to allow you, Sag, to let go of what you need to let go of in terms of your daily life that is ready to be released, just like the head of the Gorgon. And that sextile, I think, is a connection that allows you to recognize that everything you need is always here in this fourth house, right? It's just a matter of tapping into the root system that really sustains you. And that is infinite. That is transcendent. That is God, essentially. Now, Neptune, I'm not suggesting that Neptune, even Neptune in Pisces, represents that. It represents the formlessness of the ocean of consciousness, everything that there is. In Reiki, in terms of our symbols, when we do the symbol for Honshan Seishonen, and I may have just butchered that, but that's okay. When you do the symbol for that particular, when you draw the kanji for that symbol, it really just means everything is divine consciousness. And so that's what Neptune in Pisces represents. How we interpret that or use that or interface with that is where things get confusing. I think things are going to become way more clear in this area with the Neptune retrograde, but we're not there yet. In the meantime, Mercury in the 6th house is that sextile is like, okay, I know what I need to actually cut out and how to do it in terms of my everyday works, my services, my labors, my routines, my habits, because there's something infinite that I can tap into in terms of where my power comes from. And it's provided for me, and it's tailored to exactly what I need, which is Neptune and Pisces here. So that's going to be very helpful. You may find yourself being the person giving soothing words, but I'd say for Sag people, this is all about what you're doing in terms of your individual expression of who you are and how it's changing, how it's going through metamorphosis, and specifically really challenging you to be disciplined about the daily activity in order to, mature enough to come into your relationship land in that perfection. The other thing to recognize too is that the moon is in its waning gibbous or disseminating phase. So it is really just conveying the message at this point, as opposed to being fulfilled by the light of the sun like it is during its waxing half. And now it's waning, its light is waning, it is losing its power, but in that process it is spreading a message. And that's a lot of what's happening now with the moon at this point. So something you need to let go of, something that you got to release in terms of your daily life here, Sagittarius. And it's not going to be easy because you intuitively deep down know that you can't get away from the call, and this is opposite Draco, right? This is important to consider. So when we come into the 10th, that's the 3rd quarter moon. Yay! And then the sun also comes into a sextile to Chiron. We haven't even talked about Chiron yet for you guys because it's in the 5th house. So, in which is your joy, your romance and your relationship, like you putting off the blossoming of your full creative potential, your passion, your thrill, your excitement, your play. It is very childlike. It's about playing games in the 5th house. It's about enjoying oneself, taking risks. And with Chiron here, I mean, you've been, kind of stuck in that feedback loop about, service to self, service to others. Am I a victim? Am I a savior? What is it that I have to release so I can heal from my own suffering? Maybe just even allowing yourself some joy at all, or to have any kind of, there's just so much either confusion or this now with Saturn, just this very deep, stabilized, crystallized root system in terms of your home, family, and your traditions, that it's really difficult to know how to break through and release yourself so you can experience some joy, or dating or whatever it is. So, but the sun is going to sextile, and I think a lot of that in that moment is going to be realizing that there are a lot of relationships out there. You can, and not even relationships, but the way the relationships can be, that there are multiple facets that can be accessed in terms of how you relate to relationship, how you are in relationship. It doesn't have to be as stabilized as it kind of feels in some ways. And I think that is going to allow a release of some really powerful potential here in terms of joy, right? And instead of just like drudging through or thinking you'll never be happy, it's like, no, you actually can, but it may require activating this kind of, relationships can be like a buffet, and I can pick and choose how I want to be in these relationships, or how I want to interface with them. I think that's going to be very healing coming into this third quarter moon, because the sun in a square to the moon, also as a mutable square, right? Because the moon is in Pisces. Let's see here. You also have to take into consideration in terms of the root system, though, that at the right time, at the appointed location, the table will be set here in terms of your power, your home, your family, all of those things. That square is going to be very difficult, because that is the crisis in consciousness. And this is where things really start disintegrating along the lunar cycle in general. So, with the moon moving through your fourth house like this, I mean, there's so much sensitivity and so much almost moodiness, and especially in Pisces, right? It's like everybody's mood, everything that you're feeling, especially when the moon meets Neptune. Geez, you're really going to be feeling everything in these areas. So either in your, deep kind of like intuitive space and impressions, it might be in the home, in your family of origin, in your own history, right? Maybe your nation, maybe your clan that you identify, that you belong to. All of these are fourth house energies. And the crisis here, like I said, with the square to the sun is like, it's like a cafeteria. Like I can take what I want, and I can take as much as I want. And I'm really able to take in all of the data about this relationship and really be identified with that version of it. And the moon down here in Pisces is like, do you really feel deep down the power of the trust that everything that you need is going to be, it is provided for you. It's there. The table is set. It's just a matter of the timing here. So that's going to be really interesting, because in a buffet or a cafeteria, you just kind of go and take what you want and go sit down. You eat whenever you want. Whereas And that really is about who you are in the relationship, which, Sag people, anybody from Libra through Pisces is going to know themselves in the context of relationship in some way. And Sag is no different. And so you may find yourself being, filling your plate with food you can't finish, you know what I mean? Or anxious to get a move on, right? I mean, people who have eyes bigger than their stomachs type of thing. And the moon, that's going to be this kind of nagging feeling down here in this sense of deep sensitivity to who you are and where you come from. Do you trust that the table is set and that at the right time, the web of energies will come together? I think that you're going to have to ask yourself that question. Now, the moon right after that is going to come into a sextile with Uranus, still in your sixth house, right? Causing all kinds of disruptions in your everyday life and activities. And it brings stimulating encounters when these two come into a sextile. You feel more open to change and may seek it out. And I think with the moon in the fourth house, you're going to allow yourself to have some unconditioned self-discovery in this process. You're going to be open to change. You're going to have a good time to try something new in your domestic routine. Maybe you're going to take, all of that seriousness of Saturn, and not take it so seriously that you can't actually rediscover yourself without any conditions being part of it that's like heaped upon it. It's a good time to find original ways of doing things. And Uranus is something that's going to find an original way of doing something. And for you, it's going to be, the daily life. What are you doing with yourself? You can get flashes of insight with a sextile like this and feel comfortable expressing yourself, the unique side of your personality. I think the important thing is to let the aspect of Uranus that is stimulating and original to influence you emotionally, in terms of I can rediscover myself, my self-esteem, my character in this area, because of maybe unexpected changes or stimulating events in my everyday routine. I think that that's a really powerful moment here. And again, it kind of brings the energy back into, well, what are you doing with your individual expression? Because 4, 5, and 6, that's all about individual expression. So that's a pretty useful sextile. And then on the 11th, which is when Pluto's going to move back into Capricorn as of the 11th, and it's Mercury is going to cross the last degree of Taurus, move into Gemini, but not before it actually is in a trine to Pluto. So this is where it's very ideal for talking people into things. And you may be actually talking yourself into something, Sagittarius, with Mercury coming out of your 6th into your 7th, right as it's trining Pluto, which is now back in your 2nd house. And so there is such a power of penetration at the mental level with this trine. And you may be very deeply affected by another person. This may be the beginning of a karmic relationship. But I think understanding the underworld in terms of uncovering secrets about your resources, research and investigation, and analyzing, those resources and how you're going to organize them, I think you're going to be talking yourself into something potentially. But it also could be one of those moments here where you are, going back over your actual resources, your physical resources, material resources of the 2nd house, your health and your body, your physical resources like your money, your currency, your wealth, and certainly your energetic resources. And then Mercury, as it's coming out of the last degrees of Taurus, coming into its home of Gemini, it's like, you know what? I have everything that I need here. Like I've reached this point of culmination in terms of what I'm doing in my everyday life, and it's time to really go deeper now into how those resources can be brought into relationship from, and what you can learn from that. I think that is, that's going to be interesting for Sagittarius, I think, because you're really having to go back over what your actual resources are and how they've been organized in terms of your service. Because as you take that now into Gemini in the 7th house, Sag people are going to start really empirically and logically interfacing with their relationships and actually coming to, recognize patterns, like learn about yourself from the relationship itself, rather than getting so emotionally tied into the relationship as a whole, which definitely was happening a lot more with Mars and Venus going through Gemini. Definitely. Let's see what else is. So the moon's going to move into Aries, and then Venus is going to square your planet of Jupiter. And so speaking of Venus, this is usually ideal for having fun, but not getting anything done. And with Jupiter in your 6th house like this, that's really just like, hey, we need to bridge this gap here some way. Venus definitely don't want to be working and want to just basically be very friendly. Again, Venus is in Leo in the 9th house. Pay attention to me. Look what I've done. Isn't this valuable, meaningful? Even this, and I think what you'll find in this square is actually, for the most part, is something that's going to be good. Because because if you can get over the tendency toward excess and overspending and really lowering your standards with Venus, you may find that bridging the gap is coming with a little bit of struggle. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's the experience of social values being relative in terms of the big picture and understanding that are going to provide meaning. And that meaning, even in that square, is going to kind of encourage the Sag person with Jupiter, I think, to bridge some gaps within the daily life that may have been just gapped, right? A bridge across a deep gorge is where Jupiter is. So that's coming to that Venus square Jupiter on the 11th of June. And the moon will be in Aries, so of course it's going to be hot and bothered and inflamed as it usually is, and then move into Taurus on the 14th and make all kinds of connections. But the big one that's coming is not so much the moon in Taurus as much as Mercury is going to square Saturn now that it's in Gemini, in its home territory. And we're getting to the end here, guys. Thanks for sticking with me and staying focused and paying attention to everything that is part of this report. So, and these are great reports that you can go back and listen to later because there's always stuff that doesn't land the first time that makes way more sense when we get closer to the transit. So that's something to consider as well. But here you see the Mercury-Saturn square, and this is... this really favors some hard work that's done alone, because communicating plans and ideas become very difficult because there's misunderstandings, there's intentional blockage and restriction here. Take time with important decisions here, especially around relationships and where your personal power is coming from and the character that's developed in your home and family and the place where you feel secure and safe emotionally. That is the fourth house. Don't necessarily rely on the words of others. And I'd say even your own words, Sag, with Mercury and Gemini. You don't want to be caught in basically, spouting a bunch of shit that you can't back up, right? Because Saturn will definitely be like, you can't back this up. It's all well and good that you want to revolt against all of the inequality in your relationship, using your words, being able to communicate these things. But Saturn, again, is just going to be like, nope, this is kind of the evolutionary call here, and it's here for you, Sag, in the fourth house. Distance or separation in close relationships. Again, Mercury square Saturn, especially Mercury in the seventh house for Sag people. Gloomy thoughts, bad news, loneliness can affect your well-being. So, just be aware by the time we get the end, right? We're in a balsamic moon phase by this point. So it's definitely a good idea to, number one, not make important decisions or take your time with them and realize that there's going to be a disconnect with what you're communicating, attempting to communicate, or what you're saying with what is actually deeply embedding you into your own sense of personal power. And this can cause gloomy thoughts. It can be bad news, especially with Mercury in Gemini like this, and maybe communicating in terms of your relationships or listening as well. But this is going to be it's going to be a drastic kind of revolt in some ways. And Saturn, you don't revolt against Saturn. It's kind of impossible. Especially with Mercury. So be aware of that as well. That's on the 15th, leading into the 16th. Again, our balsamic moon. So at least the moon, in terms of balsamic, is now in the seventh house. It is conjunct Mercury, conjunct Aldebaran. So there's Aldebaran when it finally comes around with its opposition to Antares. So the moon, of course, is also going to square Saturn, which again restricts and depresses feelings. It makes people sad and bitter and lonely. All of those situations that suck. And also at the same time is conjunct Mercury right after that happens. And that, again, is conjunct Archangel Michael and Aldebaran. And this is an emotional sensitivity that can be really good to make close attachments, and this is great for you in terms of relationship, but and strong emotional bonds can cloud your judgment, right? There's changeable moods. It's great to get something off your chest, and maybe you just have to take the leap, right? And you're like, I don't know how this is going to land, but I'm going for it anyway. Get something off your chest, share your feelings. The important thing is that you're not making decisions, because we are in a balsamic moon, right? As dark as it's going to be before the next new moon. So the best course of action here is to maybe communicate something. Take the leap, right? You don't know how it's going to turn out, but it's, you know that you have to take the leap and see what happens, and know that the heavenly armies with Michael are behind you in this way, that you can't fail just by taking a risk and the initiative. It's like taking a nosedive in an airplane. The idea is, you're going to straighten it out, but you don't know how, you don't know what to expect in that process, other that you are challenging nature in that situation. So balsamic moon on the 16th, and the 17th is when Mercury is in a sextile to Venus, and this is when Saturn stations, right? You can see it right here, Saturn stations, and that's a whole different ball of wax. And Mars and Lilith were conjunct, and now Mercury and Venus are in a sextile. And this is where that sense of swinging around on the large oak tree, like kind of your consciousness vacillating almost wildly. You know how it feels to be on that rope swing or that tire swing. It feels amazing, You're just like so free. But that's because there's something that is actually like anchoring you to not only the swing, but that tree is anchoring everything to the ground. And this position of Mercury, again, still conjunct Aldebaran, which is kind of like pioneering into new territory. So there's more harmony, there's less stress. Opportunity to resolve conflict is the big one. And that has to do with a willingness to just let yourself enjoy the moment here and allow yourself to enjoy the meaning of your relationships. And I think that what you'll find is that it'll open up some territory in order to resolve conflict or to, find a new opportunity, express your love more efficiently, because Venus in the 9th house is like, the experience of just letting all of it go and just being kind of childlike and playing is actually very valuable and meaningful to opening up new mental pathways in terms of relationship, which I think is going to be really important. I think by the time we get to the end of this lunar cycle, Sagittarius, especially with what's coming out in terms of your identity and your subjective experience with the full moon, there's actually opportunity here as Saturn is stationing to resolve conflict in your relationships, and kind of let some things go and let yourself feel into the experience of playfulness in terms of understanding and of wisdom and expanding into your higher mind. I think that that's really very important. So Sagittarius, thank you for sticking around for this 90-minute full moon forecast. If you are interested in a reading for yourself, the links are all in the description box to take you directly to where to book the solstice forecast, the seasonal forecast, all of the Starseed discounted stuff, and then the lunar transit forecast is very easy to find. You just go to the website, go to the bookings tab, and you can pick the 30 or 60-minute for Sun, Moon, and Sag rising people. And of course, use your 10% promo code if you are part of the Starseed Fellowship for any of this stuff, and you can book your reading for the full moon regardless of your sign at that sale rate. So I really appreciate you all so very much. Don't forget to subscribe, like the channel, do all the things actually support this channel reaching a wider audience. I'll see you on our next forecast, which will be a new moon in Gemini. Take care, everyone. Bye.